Now we're going to work on carbohydrates, and we're just going to do a quick overview of some of the classes that are used in the carbohydrate chemistry. The source of carbohydrates on Earth is plants. Plants convert carbon dioxide into the carbohydrates using the light from the sun using a process called photosynthesis. Notice that there is a letter N here in this reaction as written, and that N is just saying that there is a number of carbons. So if I start off with 6 carbon dioxides, I will use 6 waters to make 1 sugar that has 6 carbons long plus 6 O2 molecules. That name carbohydrate tells us that it is hydrated carbon. As you can see in this formula, it's carbon with water attached to it. Do animals have carbohydrates, and do we create carbohydrates? Yes to both of those. Animals have carbohydrates because they ate plants who created the original carbohydrates, and animals reform those carbohydrates into different forms that are used in the animal, but they don't create them from carbon dioxide. So where do we use carbohydrates? Well, carbohydrates are the major source of energy for both plants and animals. It's how energy is stored. In the short term, both plants and animals use glucose for immediate energy usage. Plants store their energy as starch, and animals store that energy as glycogen. Very similar structures, but there are some minor differences. And finally, plants do use sugars, carbohydrates, as a structural material known as cellulose, and that is their cell walls that you find in plants, but you do not find in animals. There are 3 major classes of carbohydrates. They are the monosaccharide, the disaccharide, and the polysaccharide. And from their name, you probably have some idea of what they are. Saccharide just means sugar. Mono means single sugar. Disaccharide means double sugar. And poly means many sugars. Literally, in this case, it's anything more than 2, but generally we're talking about 10,000 to 100,000 sugars linked together. So this is how some of them are drawn. For the monosaccharides, one of the common ways to do this is in a vertical line with shorter crosshatches. Now those lines that go across, every time they touch that main chain, that is going to be a carbon, and then we're going to put an OH on one side and an H on the other side. And so that's the common form for monosaccharides. Additionally, the very top one may be an aldehyde, or the second one might be a ketone. So generally speaking, it's a carbon chain with these crosses saying that there's an OH on each one. Every carbon needs to have an oxygen on it, and each one has an aldehyde or a ketone. Having that double bond allows the formula to be correct, where we have the C, H2O, and then the N to say that there's a whole group of H2Os attached to carbon. Later we'll give you details about where those OHs are located, if they're on the left or the right. But for now, just know that a bunch of OHs on a carbon chain with an aldehyde or ketone on it means that you're looking at a monosaccharide. Another way that we draw monosaccharides is to draw a ring. And in nature, this is the most common form that we see, is in this ring form rather than in the vertical form. We draw the vertical form in order to understand the relationships between them, but we draw the other ring form is the way that we find it in nature. When we move on to disaccharides, you're going to see them generally in their ring form. So we're going to put 2 ring sugars together, and they're going to be linked. And there's a variety of different ways we link them. We'll talk more about how they're linked, but I'm going to show you 2 models. Here's the first one, and here's the second one. Notice that the major difference here is just the linkage. So we're going to be identifying whether it has an alpha link or a beta link, dependent upon whether that link first goes up or first goes down. When we get to the polysaccharides, they're usually modeled with a parenthesis saying that this group is repeating. Now these can also go either up or down, as we saw in the disaccharides, and the rules will be the same. And you'll see that I put parentheses around this group in the center, and then I put a letter N down below, and that means that there's that many rings. And again, that number can be up to 10,000, 20,000, maybe even 100,000 of those rings, all linked together in a very long chain. Sometimes there are branches, and we're going to talk about how you can see if there's a branch or not. And we're going to talk about how you can count to find the location of where those links are. So again, next we're going to talk about each of the classes of carbohydrates individually.